By popular request of one person, I'm going to illustrate my technique for doing standing rib roast, also sometimes incorrectly known as prime rib. There are a couple of items that we're going to need for the first step, and this can be done, in advance. We're going to be seasoning the standing rib roast. First, you're going to want to source a standing rib roast. I recommend calling your local butchers. Sometimes there's a lead time. Just tell them that you want it trussed, the bones off, but trussed back on, which is what a standing rib roast is to my knowledge, and then tell them about how many people you're expecting. They'll cut it up for you. You're also going to need a neutral oil for binding. I'm using a extra virgin olive oil, which is exactly neutral. Gloves, cooking gloves help. Black pepper, although if you can do freshly cracked black pepper, that's better. Sea salt. You're gonna want a bowl. Garlic and a garlic mince, or you can use a chopping board if you really need to, and alcohol. Because you could cook 7 or 8 pounds of beef sober, I just don't know why you ever would. I also recommend a dripping tray with some sort of rack to keep it elevated. You're going to use that if you're cooking it in the oven, but it's also good for the seasoning portion. Again, the seasoning can happen the earlier that you do this, the better. Now, the first thing we got to do is unwrap this. So first take out your gigantic redneck pocket knife and just cut it out of the bag. Now, because we have our bones removed, but still tied on, for the seasoning pork, if you want, you can actually remove the string, take the bone off and season all sides of the meat. And if I was doing this a day in advance, I would probably do that and then tie it back on. But I'm not going to today because this is going into the smoker today. Grab paper towels and dry off your meat on all sides. Optionally, you can trim the excess fat off of this. That'll help with a better bark for smoking and better season adherence. But again, I don't feel like doing that. Next, I'm going to prepare our binding solution. So I'm going to add olive oil to, or you can use vegetable oil, but an oil nonetheless, to a pan. And then I'm going to take, for a roast this size, I'm going to say 7, maybe 8 cloves of fresh garlic. And I'm going to mince them into the olive oil and then mix that around. And then just do that 8 or 9 more times. So now you have a mass of oil with a bunch of pressed garlic into it. Now's a good time to clean up your work surface and wash off your knife and your garlic press. And then go ahead and put on gloves if you have them. We're going to be stirring the garlic so that it's kind of incorporated into that oil, which we're then going to apply manually on all of the sides of our standing rib roast. Now, it may sound like 9 cloves of garlic for something this size might be a bit much, too garlicky, but you got to remember, the only seasoning that you're going to get per serving is going to be on the outer edge of the meat. And the same thing is going to be true in the way that we spice with pepper and salt. We're going to apply a gratuitous amount, and it's going to sound like a lot, but there's a reason for it. I'm going to start with freshly cracked black pepper, coarse ground if you can do it. And then I'm going to come in and hit it with a liberal salt. This is coarse sea salt. Kosher salt works well too. It looks pretty heavily seasoned, but that's okay. And so now, the appropriate time is, the more time that you can let this rest and the seasoning absorb into the meat, the better. So the salt in particular is gonna pull some of the moisture out of the meat through osmosis. And then once that salt is dissolved, that liquid, salty, and spicy slurry will be sucked back in the meat, deepening the season. So again, if you can do this a day in advance and put it in the fridge, that's ideal. I'm gonna try to give it 20, 30 minutes or so like this. And then we're gonna go ahead and fire up the smoker. So the smoker and the grill recipe, or I'm sorry, not the grill, but the smoker and the oven recipes aren't too terribly dissimilar. The idea is low and slow. So we're going to be aiming for about 250 degrees for either method. Okay, so now I want to make the white horseradish sour cream sauce. And so the ingredients we're going to need is Worcestershire sauce, and there's two kinds. There's Lee and Perrins, and there's stuff that goes in the garbage. Don't make the mistake. You're going to want Dijon mustard or something similar. Stone ground hot mustard. Sour cream, and prepared horseradish or fresh horseradish, and also a bowl. You're going to want to prepare this as early as possible. You want to give it at least 2-3 hours for the flavors to mellow and for this to be chilled out. So right now I'm actually cooking lunch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What? Yes, so we're going to go ahead and mix that now before we even start the smoker or the oven. So for precise measurements, we're going to add sour cream, about that much, which is 3 globs worth. And we're going to add horseradish precisely this amount. You must measure this very carefully. That amount. No more, no less, otherwise it could be catastrophic and a danger to national security. Don't do it. That amount exactly. That's precisely the exact amount. No more, no less. Otherwise, the terrorists win. For Lee and Perrins Worcestershire sauce, the right amount, which is that much. The exact right amount, allegedly. Next, we need to add some Dijon mustard. This is spicy, thanks to Ryan. I'm going to add 2 half spoonfuls because it's all that's left in this. And I'm going to start stirring it up. And finally, we're going to add mayonnaise. This is my special homemade habanero mayonnaise. It's going to give it the last final kick, hopefully. And so I'm going to mix this up. I'm going to taste it and make sure it has the right flavor profile. And if it doesn't, then we add whatever it's lacking. It's looking pretty good. That's pretty good. All right, so now you have your meat seasoned over here, and it's been sitting for a while, hopefully. And then you either have your oven preheated to about 250, or like me, you're gonna go ahead and get your smoker going. So I'm using applewood and lump charcoal. Don't use the charcoal that has the automatic lighter fluid, because then you'll taste the automatic lighter fluid. So if you're doing an oven cook, you're going to want to put in 1, probably 2 meat thermometers into different parts of the meat. You want the thermometer to end up in the middle of the meat. And then once your oven is preheated to 250 degrees, pop it in. If you don't have an electronic meat thermometer, get one on Amazon. They're not that expensive. The combination of the rack and the dripping tray will allow you to collect the juices and what's going to be the fond, which is going to be the crux of our au jus / beef gravy. If you don't use an oven, I'll walk you through how to use a smoker for that. Now, whether you're doing this on the smoker or an oven, you want something to catch the drippings. That's going to be crucial to our au jus / beef gravy. So right now I have a lower grate in on the smoker with a Pyrex bowl. I would rather use a cast iron skillet, but mine won't fit in here, so this will hopefully have to do. You want to be able to reheat the vessel once the roasting is done to deglaze it with our red wine, and we'll get to that later. Now we're going to attach the meat thermometers and put the standing rib roast on the grill. If you're doing this in the oven, you can actually put the whole tray with the raised rack like this right in the oven, and then start preheating the oven to 250 degrees. Let it come up to temperature slowly. But so I'm going to add this over here. Don't need the rack because I already have this right over our dripping pan. I'm going to put the bones down, and then I'm going to take my 2 temperature probes and put them in different places, trying to get to the middle of the meat. If you don't have a meat thermometer, you are living your life inappropriately. It makes life so much easier. Just adding in 2 different locations so I can kind of get an overall feel of how the meat is doing. This goes on top. Then I'll hook everything up, and then I'm going to be monitoring for 118 internal temperature, and the 3rd probe is monitoring the overall ambient temperature in the smoker, looking for around 250 degrees. So 225 to 275, I'll live with it. All right, we're checking in. Our temperatures internally are about 90 degrees, so we're looking for 118 to take it off to start resting. We've got some smoke going. We've got some juices in the pan there. We're starting to get a bit of a bark outside, and that's good. Now we just keep waiting. All right. The meat is now 118 degrees internal temperature. And that means it's time to rest it and then take a look at the crust. So if your smoker doesn't give you enough crust, you can either do a sear it, or if you're doing it in the oven, once it gets 118, you want to rest it for about 15 minutes or so. Let that cool down, and then you can turn the oven to 500, 550 degrees and kind of broil it just to get an outer crust. But the inside is basically done. There's going to be a bit more carryover heat. All right, so now I'm resting, but I'm going to kind of experiment with something. It's got an okay crust, but I really want more brown drippings in the pan. So I'm likely going to go ahead and pour some of this stuff here into this pan and wait for it to rest. Rip the pan to high heat, sear it real quick on 3 of the sides, and then set that seared meat over here, and then we'll work on the roux. But we got to let the meat cool down first. We don't want to overcook it. So 15 to 30 minutes just to let the internal temperature cool down. I purchased some dark red wine, $14 a bottle. Nothing terribly fancy, but I like the darker and deeper reds because we really want to concentrate that extra flavor in this, especially because I'm going to try to make enough of this au jus / gravy to be used on mashed potatoes as well as the beef. So I'm going to start heating up very slowly the eye for our dripping pan, because there's still little bits of fat and goodness that we want to get off of there. All right, so I've got a red wine. Again, you can use cooking wine, but I prefer to use the real thing. We're not going to use a lot for this just yet. We're going to splash that in here. We're going to get a wooden dowel, and we're going to scrape off all the delicious particles left in there and get it out of there. So we don't want that there. We want that in the final pan, which is going to be our cast iron skillet. So we've got a little bit of heat right now. This is called deglazing. This is not the main deglazing we're going to do, but we're going to go ahead and scrape up all that good stuff and get it cooked off and pour it into the cast iron skillet. We're going to do the sear, and then we're going to deglaze that searing pan. And then that's where we're going to build our sauce, our gravy. All right, so I have a large cutting board, and I'm going to go ahead and transfer our cooked meat, but not fully seared meat, over to the large cutting board. Larger ones are nice. They're worth it on Amazon. And then we're gonna get that cast iron skillet up pretty hot. It's already got some of that beef fat in there, and that's gonna help it cook rather evenly, but we do wanna get it pretty hot. Now it's juicy, and that's good, and that's what we want. Any of the extra juices that are gonna spill out, keep them in the pan. Just putting this here for now. And then I'm gonna set this to medium high. We're gonna use that wooden spatula as the pan heats up. We just wanna keep all these flavors kind of mellowing and deepening. Make sure nothing's getting stuck at the bottom. I am going to add a little bit of butter as well, just to make sure we get plenty of fat in there. Oh, the butter is melted down. I'm going to go ahead, get it in on the first side. Getting up on 2 minutes. Let's go ahead and carefully, because there's spluttering oil everywhere, take a look. We've got some juice drippings from our resting area, so we're just going to go ahead and get as many of those into here as possible as well. That's fat and that's protein, and that's all good too. And so, let's take a look. See if we get a much better crust than we had before. We're going to have some of the charcoal notes. We're going to have the hint of the smoke. We're going to have the seasoning, and now we've got a bit more of the char. But what we need over here is for the heat to come down, and then to really deglaze our pan. This is the beginning of the au jus and the gravy. And so we want as much of that goodness as we can get over there. So I'm going to do a rough tin foil over our roast. This will help keep some of the juices in. And that can sit for 15-20 minutes. There we go. That's all we need. Now all the crusty stuff is off the bottom of the pan, and now it's being slowly rendered down into a much stronger sauce. We're going to go ahead and cut that with our beef broth. And I'm using bone broth, gluten-free, because some people have inferior genes and can't deal with gluten. And we're going to just slowly reduce this before we thicken it. Now it's starting to cook down. I'm going to go ahead and take it out of the cast iron skillet, because we've gotten all of the goodness off the bottom of that we want. And I'm going to use a strainer, which is a handy dandy tool that will come in handy later on, into a saucepan or a whatever this is. So I'm going to start heating this up. All right. We're going to set that there. And then we're going to slowly drain our contents in there. It's going to strain out any of the larger particulate matter. And then we have to clean and dry that strainer, because we're going to be using that to thicken. That's a secret technique I picked up. That's really handy. Okay. So there's that. And there. So when it comes time to thicken our au jus / gravy, there's a secret that I learned from one of these YouTube online chefs that has really improved my ability to thicken stuff without getting a bunch of clumpy, lumpy bits of flour or cornstarch. And today we're going to use cornstarch, but you can use either one. Cornstarch is gluten-free, so people who are deficient in that particular ability to eat things can still partake of delicious food, even though they are wildly disabled. Now, the best way I've found to thicken a gravy or stew with cornstarch or flour is to use this sieve and to sift in your desired particulate. That helps it keep from forming those nasty clumps. So I'm going to do that now. Then you just
Someone's looking bad.
and then you stir it in, and it doesn't form any clumps. All right, so we've rested the stuff. I've cut away the twine. We can remove this right here. Now we've got ribs over here, and this is the first cut. A little bit of bone still there, that's okay. You trim this up on the bandsaw. That looks pretty good. Let me take a bite. Oh yeah.